Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of What's New in Cloud FinOps with myself, Stephen Old, and my good friend.
Frank Entrepois.
Hello, Frank. And today we are finally talking about a topic that we have talked about a lot, but with someone actually knows what they're on about. And we're talking about focus with a special guest. Please introduce yourself, special guest.
Hey all, my name is Udam Dewaraja. I'm the working group chair for the focus specification. And been around this space for a long time.
Forever.
Done stints at various different stakeholders, I would say, in this. Cloud provider space, was an early engineer at AWS. Vendor space, spent half a dozen years at building Aptio and Cloudability products. Head of FinOps for large financials. And then last year left that to start the Focus project. So yeah, lots of different
You've literally
different stuffs.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because it is quite different in all of those spaces. I mean, especially for me, I've never worked for a cloud vendor, but working kind of one-to-one, i.e. for one organization versus one-to-many in a service provider, it is a totally different game, isn't it? And people don't often quite realize until they do it how different that can feel.
That is very true. And I'll say it opened my eyes when I went into Citigroup feeling very confident. Hey, we've been building the premier tool here for years in the cloud, FinOps space. How hard could it be to just go, solve this for one company now? Actually really opened my eyes to like how broad this problem is, and many of this thinking around like focus and some of those things really got into my head from actually being exposed to this, like this from the customer and the consumer perspective. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of that. Those few years.
It is so different. So listen, today we probably have the most structure we've ever had planned for a podcast with an interview, because we're going to talk about exactly the past of Focus, like how it came to be, where it is now, and where you see the future is. How simple is that? Genius in its simplicity. So I honestly don't think I know really, unless you've told me before, as in just you and I, but I've never heard it kind of explained exactly where it started, how it came about. So can you share with us?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, like many organizations have kind of had to solve this issue of not having a common taxonomy. They all just happen to do it on their own. So when I went to Citigroup, I also built a taxonomy for normalizing all the costs for Citigroup, right? And we started to kind of have some conversations within the FinOps Foundation and some of the working groups. I don't know, some folks might remember I did a talk at the very first FinOps X about SaaS being the next challenge. And really it was about the fact that SaaS providers and their costs and the need for being data driven. And that is not very different from the challenges you face with your cloud providers, just maybe a slightly smaller scale. But at a place like Citi, for example, if you're spending millions of dollars in cloud or millions of dollars on a Snowflake contract or millions of dollars on MongoDB, that's all important. There's not, you can't say those millions aren't important while the AWS millions are important, right? So we were going down this path of building this this kind of our own taxonomy. Did a different podcast, one called FinOps Fridays from a few years ago. Made a joke to JR and the foundation that like the foundation should be the place where we build this, kind of common language, common schema. And JR sees this, calls me out on LinkedIn publicly to say, okay, let's go do it then. And so one thing led to another there, and then we all kind of came together as a community. There's a few kind of key people at the very beginning that believed in this, which really helped because it wasn't so much of an uphill battle right away, because it resonated with people that have already done it or had to do it for their organizations. So yeah, that's how we kind of got started. It was 5 or 10 people that first month, and then it just kind of constantly kept growing into by FinOps X of 2023, which was only 10 weeks after we launched Focus. I think we were at about 25 people. And then once we made that announcement there for 0.5, that really kind of accelerated all the interest. So yeah, that's how we got started.
And I appreciate if you can't tell me the answer to this, but I would be interested. If I think about the people I know who are actually involved in the program, but who have had to solve the problem, like the tooling providers had to. So you had to do it at Aptio, Lucas had to do it at Cloud Health, etc. Even though they've solved the problem, that's part of their value. My understanding is the platforms got involved pretty quickly, right? And were willing to help and contribute. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say many of the platforms recognize that like the value add that they should be providing isn't only in the normalization of data, right? It's what can you then do with that data to help your customers succeed. So those folks that realize that, and I would say many of them also knew how much of a problem it was to do it in an ad hoc way, right?
Yeah.
That's why in Cloudability for years we only supported AWS and then to some level GCP and Azure, though it was never at the same exact level as AWS, right? Because it was really hard to kind of from the outside in without any involvement from the clouds and some of these kind of experts to try to like do a one-for-one normalization across all these different providers. Hopefully that problem is no longer the case with Focus, right? Like normalization becomes maybe a little easier now, and then the problem set shifts to that next value-added thing that vendors can do.
So you found a problem that almost every customer had, really, or any of a certain side that is working. Did you use that to go to the company, which are the cloud vendors, which are customer focused, and telling them, hey, this is the feedback, we're working on an initiative? The question really is, how did you get all the big guys helping there?
On board, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer from the early kind of AWS days that like cloud providers will succeed when there's scale on their platforms. And the biggest thing that enables scale is people feeling like they are getting value from their investments into these providers, right? So just like a quick nugget from like the early AWS days, you remember we used to cut costs all the time, right? Like the S3 costs would be like almost like every 3 months, every 6 months, there'd be a price cut. And every time we used to see the curve kind of flattening out for adoption, they would cut costs back then, and it would just result in things hockey stick growth again, right? So like the whole goal was to, can you bring enough volume onto the platform to make all these make sense? It was good for everybody if people were being efficient. So one of the main blockers in FinOps, as we all know, for getting to that level of efficiency and accountability is understanding the data. So when we took that view to the cloud providers, several of them jumped on right away, right? So the project was actually founded with a steering committee that contained Microsoft and Google, and then others joined, as the business case was made. And, in some cases, we were able to present many of the customers from the FinOps community as, their testimonials that like this is really a problem. And so like I would say in the community, sometimes I hear some mistrust about like why would providers want to make it easier for people to understand. Like I don't believe in that. I just see,
why wouldn't they?
Exactly. It's in their best interest because you're going to go end up spending more, make more investment in their services if you have a better experience and you understand their cost structures and your own usage in those platforms. So that I would say using a place like the Linux Foundation / FinOps Foundation for building these kind of things is absolutely critical, right? Me and let's say Walmart and a few other people could have gone out on the side and try to build our own standard because we've maybe done some of these things in the past. Like it would have never gotten to the level of kind of passion that people have around this. It would have never gotten the level of kind of publicity and all that. That comes from the fact that we did it through the Linux Foundation as a practitioner-led effort to go solve this problem and advance this industry as a whole to kind of move from this normalization problem to the bigger problems that are in front.
So you get a team together early on. How do you start such a mammoth task? You get that first call. What's the first thing you do?
That's a good question. I was very nervous at that very first, kind of starting point. I had never built a specification or a standard like this before. It was just all new. Obviously, we had a good amount of support. Mike Fuller was, fully on board, JR and Rob and some of the folks from the foundation. So we had a good core there to like help kind of get this thing off the ground. But really, I mean, like I quit my job at Citigroup in March, and we had the first focus meeting in April. And between that time, the thing that was on my plate was, can we get kind of a initial this 10-week plan to get an announcement out at FinOpsX. So we focused on what are the absolute most critical things that you need to have in the specification, right? Yes. So I'm right now just talking specifically about the content of the specification.
Yeah.
And there was a whole separate effort around like, who can we bring in under this umbrella to like show the like the interest and whatnot. So from the content perspective, when you look at a cloud bill, there's just a few can't miss things. Like you need a billing period equivalent and a charge period equivalent and certain things like what is the cash basis cost and the a cost metric that is inclusive of amortization. You need a service name, you need a provider, like these kinds of things were the low hanging fruit. So we knocked out like 22 or so columns in that first 10 weeks by just splitting into like 2-3 squads. At the time we called them squads back then. Whatever small team we had, we divided them into 2 parallel teams, and essentially we were just started adding this content. Obviously, as time went on, things get harder and harder, right? Like you start knocking out all the easier stuff and you get into like commitment discounts stuff. And like all the the very controversial things. Not that even early on there wasn't controversy, because at the end of the day, you're coming into an established industry, right? Yeah. So each vendor, each provider has already like made a foothold with their terminology, their way of thinking about problems. And here we are trying to essentially come up with a common way. Sometimes some folks are not going to be happy with every decision. And early on, we made this a principle of focus that we are going to always work backwards from the practitioner, right? It's not about how any one provider does things. It's about how do we go solve this for the practitioner? And what do they need? And then how do you work backwards from that to what needs to be in the data? What's the semantics? What are the data types? What are the, the naming and all those kinds of things? So that kind of thing made it a little easier, but I mean, you'd be shocked at like the number of 3-hour conversations we'd have on, naming conventions and
on
naming
one column,
on one column, So but fun times.
I remember JR talking about that, saying people calling him on weekends to shout about the name of the column or something like this. Quite interesting. So that brings us to now.
Challenging. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I was thinking, no, that brings us, so that gets us. Now we know how you structured it, where you started, how you got on board with others, how you've brought the Linux Foundation, the customers to get it all together. So where is right now, folks? So you've done a release, a 1.0, so that's a GA release, a launch, or whatever name we can use. And the question is, so where do you feel, as one of the probably the initiator, what is the state today of Focus?
Yeah. So I think we announced the 1.0 in June at the FinOps X conference. So it took us 12 months from that 0.5 to work through a lot of those complex topics, right? And then so that included, some of the commitment discount support and usage related kind of data and things like that. And then we quickly switched over to 1.1. So that's what we've been working on till now. It's just putting the finishing touches on that right now. Again, it's got a few different areas where we're focused on. We're going deeper into SKUs, right? As you all know, like service level reporting is good, but then you really got to get deeper than that to know,
Yes.
Where your money is being spent, what you're being charged for.
Yeah.
Service subcategorization is important. Like we did the initial categorization, which keeps it at a very high level, compute, storage, databases. But now we're getting down into, containers and quantum computing and virtual machines and block storage, blob storage, all that kind of subcategorization. So there's a lot of really good stuff in 1.1. That's really the next level kind of capabilities that Focus will enable. And I'd say, this is like for our potential like consumers of the Focus specification, there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? We can only incrementally build the specification. We want to get the feedback from those that are using it. So if we wait too long, like we essentially hold this thing from bringing any value. But at the same time, we're not going to be able to like completely solve all use cases in this, kind of first version. So people will have to, like I would encourage folks to take a look at, every cloud provider now. The largest cloud provider, largest cloud providers have put out their version of Focus compatible data sets. Start using it, start getting that feedback loop going back to the foundation, back to the Focus working group. The FinOps Foundation has a user group already established as well, through which you can bring this feedback into the working group in a very systematic way. Because we're just right now starting to figure out what needs to be in 1.2, right?
Yeah.
And we would love for 1.2 to be some of the most important things that are stopping you from adopting Focus. We go address that batch of things so that in the next 6 to 12 months, a lot more people can get started with Focus. So don't wait for perfect Focus specification, because there'll always be some amount of time between for what we can do from a specification perspective, what the providers can support, in terms of meeting those specifications. And all things take time. So just start getting value from it so that you can provide the feedback loop.
One of the things I've always liked about Focus from when I first started reading about it and looking into it was the use case library. I think that's fantastic. I think that comes back to the point of starting with the practitioner in mind. Can you share with listeners a little bit about the use case library?
Yeah. So, I mean, very early on, when we started this effort, we decided that this has got to be practitioner based. The principle for adding something to the specification can't be that hey, provider X has certain columns, therefore they want that to get into the specification in a standardized way. Sorry, but that doesn't necessarily tell me what the value that it's going to provide is. But if we can show from the practitioner perspective that this actually enables chargeback or it enables forecasting use cases or RI and commitment discount optimization kind of use cases or procurement use cases, we broke it down by persona and FinOps capability so that we can prove to ourselves what is the actual consumer trying to do, and then make sure those use cases are served by what we actually do. So that was always our North Star. Then, it's gone through a couple of iterations. First, we created the use case library within the focus group. Then we thought, okay, of course, there's a million years of like FinOps experience in some of these folks that have been doing this since day one, from the Walmarts and like very advanced, Goldman Sachs folks and some of these folks. But we felt it would be better if we can actually push this use case library to the foundation where there's even more practitioners that can, essentially provide feedback for it or generate new use cases. And then us as the focus group consume from that at the kind of the high level use case level, then go figure out how do we enable these use cases. So it's gone from the being a focus working group owned area to now FinOps Foundation owned area. But the idea is still the same, that we just want to get actual use cases documented by the folks that are doing it, and then figure out how to go solve it with the data.
Fantastic. So that brings us to the now, I think. I'm comfortable. I know where we're up to. Frank, are you?
Well, I think we're on the now. That's what started the now. You explained the now. Now we go into some of the detail of what exists today, which I think. And by the way, for people who are listening, also focus.finops.org is the place you want to go, because I fear that we've missed a bit of what is focus at the beginning.
Yes,
true.
Maybe you can cut some part of this into it.
Nah.
But people are used to this. Yeah. So yeah, the FinOps Open Cost and Usage Standard is what we've been talking about for the last 22 minutes, listeners, just in case, and how it came to being because of the problems of the normalization of data. But yeah, I guess for someone that's never seen a standard or a specification, can you tell them a little about what actually was released, what it looks like, and kind of what it's made up of?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a data specification, right? So what we're dealing with is we're specifying how the data needs to look. We're not getting into, hey, provider X has this service and the provider Y has this other service and these two are equivalent, or their billing construct called X and this other group's billing construct called Y is equivalent. We're not trying to do any of those things, right? Because we're coming into an established ecosystem here. So what we're trying to do is trying to give them a common language and a common schema for presenting their data, however it maps to their individual providers, kind of constructs. But then the benefit for our consumers is that they have this fixed schema and fixed terminology to receive this data, right? So we have, obviously, just like any data set, we have metric columns. Obviously, these are your kind of quantitative columns. Then we also have qualitative columns, which, are the dimensions, right? And some subset of these dimensions are normalized. And that actually provides some of that common language that you can apply across the different data sources. So service name, for example, is not a normalized column. That can't be normalized because everybody's used to hearing, Google GCP BigQuery or EC2, and they want to do their reporting based on those values because that's what they recognize on the service. But we've also introduced the service category, which is normalized. So that will have values like compute and storage and database so that across the cloud providers, you can look at the database services and RDS costs and Redshift costs, and then combine that with your GCP BigQuery costs and Azure SQL related costs to know that, hey, as an organization, I'm spending this amount of money in database related costs. And then, oh, by the way, this cost is going up over time, or maybe there's some anomalous spend. Like, I'm able to use that common language to understand this, right? And this, like, in my opinion, a lot of people will recognize this and say, oh, wow, this is going to help FinOps teams, right? And I believe that too. Obviously, like having been on the practitioner side, it would make my life hugely easier to not have to do, some of the normalization, even though we as practitioners were already doing some of this normalization ourselves in most cases. To me, the biggest value of a data specification is as you try to go expand this out to your broader organization, right? I think we've all been around the block enough to know that like FinOps is not like some magical, like one team solves all problems. Like, Foundation has been referring to this as a team sport and all that, because in order to be successful in FinOps, you need your broader organization to be enabled and accountable for the spend and all that. To me, the biggest value of focus and a data specification is that that broader organization now has one language that they need to understand, right? They don't need to know about every provider's very kind of intricate, details. They can get a very high level, like, understanding based on the focus specification and then drill in where they actually need to. So from that kind of perspective, I'm also like very excited about the benefit that a data specification, and in this case focus specifically, can bring to the broader community.
And I want to add something small there, but it's more about the surprise. So if you're not used to read data specification, it's quite strange, because sometimes for lots of things you have a header and then you have 3 words. The header might be longer than the specification. I was just looking at it. It feels strange because you say, but that's obvious. Say, like, for example, I'm reading one which is 2.4.1 colon ID, and underneath it says billing account name. Done. And so don't worry, it is normal. It is the fact that if you're building that environment, you look at each column, you need each column to be defined in the same way so you can start understanding how it all works together. There will be something that you do not have to add, as Udam was saying, you don't need to add anything to them. So yeah, they will be very simple. Say, hey, what comes in is what we get. Others, there will be some calculation involved. Others might be, hey, there are constraints that others might not have. So each of those things mean that if you present them in a structured way, which is the same for absolutely every column, it makes that some column look strange or very empty. I remember opening the first time and say, ooh, that looks very white.
I know. Several people asked us, like, wait, so you spend all these hundreds of hours to build this? And like, if only you understood what it means to like bring like structure to subscriptions and projects and sub accounts that like resource groups and all these different constructs that all these providers have, and try to like thread the needle to like find this like common
even if
language.
you've just tried to make a table, a comparison table, you start to see that. But a lot of people haven't. That's what I found. It's kind of going, well, but it's an account. I'm like, which cloud are we in? Because an account means a different thing.
Different
that kind of thing. That's another one to add to our list, Frank, for our keynote next week. What an account means.
Account, and spot price also is an interesting one. And
So I have to say, so I've not read many data standards before, and I actually found it very clear. Because I basically I read it to do the exam. I thought I'm going to see if I can do the exam with just basically reading that, and that's basically all I did, and I passed the exam.
Nice.
I thought it'd be a good way to learn about it, because I just haven't had to do them. Like, if I have a data question, I just go to Frank. That's just how my life works. It's true.
Nice to have Frank as your AI.
It works. Well, I don't know if it's artificial, but it's very human intelligence. But
it's good.
It has all the hallucination I included too.
Yeah, yeah. You got to get him on a good day.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've built it. We've got this lovely specification. We've working 1.1. Then you can start working 1.2 again with feedback from the community. But what's the long-term dream? What do you think can be done on top of something like Focus? What's the future?
Yeah. So I'll break this into kind of two areas, right? Like, and I'm going to preface this by saying when I left Citigroup, I was really passionate about solving two different problems. I think one is this data normalization problem, which has plagued like everybody and really slowed everybody down in their kind of FinOps journey. So that's what we've been talking about, and I'll address at least what I think is in the future for that. I think generally for FinOps, I think there's also areas that I think we need to move forward and improve as a community for this to become like just ubiquitous in the way DevOps is within organizations. So I'll kind of address that part second. So for Focus, I think we have still a good amount of work, just even on the cloud side of things, to dive deeper into areas that just aren't yet captured. And as I've said, like as time has gone on, the cost of like adding a new column has gotten really, high because we're now into like the very complex, very controversial areas that, we're trying to find still a consensus way to, add something into the specification. So that will take a significant amount of time and effort. There's no, doubt in my mind but it needs to happen. And I think everybody within the group is motivated to kind of go solve those problems. So like that's going to take a good amount of time, at least in the next 12 months. But I think in terms of expansion, we've really like focused on cloud, in the initial going. We've always kept, an eye on SaaS and internal costs and some of those kinds of things, private clouds and those kinds of things. But I think it's a good time for us to like formally expand into those areas and make sure that anybody consuming the specification understands that no, it's not just for cloud. It can be used for SaaS data. It can be used for private cloud data. And when I initially mentioned this at Citigroup, my boss's boss, the CTO, his main interest for Citi perspective was, can this be applied to beyond public cloud? Because our private cloud and data center estate was 10 times as bigger than the public cloud estate, right? So I just know that there's a lot of kind of demand for that kind of expansion. So that's there. There's also a lot of kind of intersection points around like, where does this fit with sustainability data, right? Can Focus now this kind of brand that's been established, can that be used to introduce another thing under the Focus umbrella for sustainability data? What about observability and that intersection between FinOps? What about pricing data? Can this be extended into that? So these things have come up. Obviously there's a lot of members in Focus, but there's only so many that can really like dedicate a lot of time and effort into it. So we're going to continue to expand as fast as we possibly can. And that's where like, especially for these expansion areas, we would love to get either providers in this space or practitioners and other passionate people to just put their hand up, go sign the CLA and just become members and say, hey, I'd like to really lead this area of this specification and own it and drive it with the community, build some level of consensus around those ideas. So all things I think are on the table and are possible. It's just a matter of how much can we execute in a given amount of time with basically with volunteers that are, just dedicating. I actually want to give a shout out to all those folks. There are people that are spending 15 hours a week across
Wow.
all 5 days of the week on 2 hours per call, sometimes more afterwards. Really, just because they're so passionate about solving this set of problems for the community, and so like I've been like incredibly thankful to have those folks in our working group and leading the way on some of that stuff. So yeah, that's the focus side, I would say.
Fantastic. So, I mean, here's an example of something, right? So, I'm working with an organization, and we have cloud spend, largely AWS and some Azure. No GCP that I found yet. But then, but then on the flip side, we've got a big private cloud, say, or self-hosted.
Yeah.
And so we have worked with, so far, largely with Kudos dashboards, right? Or sorry, CID, as they're called now, the cost intelligence dashboards, and we bring stuff in. And so now one of the next things I'm looking at is starting to pull in the private cloud data. And one of the things I've been thinking about, and I might as well run this past you now, is actually I've got to create some sort of export anyway to put it then into somewhere for me to then build the dashboards. In this case, with QuickSight. But I could actually fill in a focus framework as a data frame, right? Put those same kind of concepts in, then use that as my base. That's the kind of,
Absolutely.
it stops me having to start from scratch, is what I'm thinking, and that's the kind of place it could be used as well, right?
That's absolutely the way I would go, and in fact, that's what I had to do at Citigroup, for example, right? When it was our internal standard back then, or our internal schema back then, but I had to take all these random costs. We had all these internal costs that needed to be allocated and things like that. And having one, schema allows you to like now just take these. Sometimes these costs come in a PDF, right? Like, but as long as you can put it into this format, it's going to stack up with the rest of the costs and provide you that same level of reporting capabilities and chargeback and some of those other things, right? So it's almost like the template to fill out now. So that you get all of the benefits of all the use cases and whatnot. Yeah.
So I think we're reaching the end of this recording, but the question is, Udam, what final thoughts, final things you want to say?
Yeah. I'll touch on that kind of the second part of at least what I see in the coming years for FinOps. I think like we need to start. A few points I'll make. I think we need to start looking at this problem not just as a cloud problem, right? Our organizations all have, you just touched on it for some internal spend. We touched on it earlier about SaaS spend. There might be many different types of spend that really ultimately factors into that total cost picture that that folks really have to get to in order to make good data-driven decisions about their business, right? If you're trying to make decisions based on business value, then you can't do it based on just one cloud provider's cost, right? Because your other SaaS spend might be just, a dumpster fire, and you might completely not realize that all at the end of the day impacts your margins and impacts your unit economics and all those things. So like, it's really important that we start broadening our view and stop kind of pigeonholing FinOps into just cloud. These principles apply generally for lots of different areas of costs. Right?
So I would love to have an episode on this, because there is a bit of me that struggles to connect the old way that has done things in a way that it was working for them into, in some form way, complicating it by making it fit into a model that was initially designed for cloud. So I would love, at one point, we need to find someone to interview about this.
Yeah.
Sorry, Udam, I interrupted you.
Oh, no worries. And then I guess the final thing I would say is that like FinOps still to me is like has not reached the level of maturity in terms of how we can bring some company into this like concept of FinOps and like make them easily succeed, just because it's just very, I would say the tooling and the processes are still too ad hoc. You may have native data in some cloud providers, data sets, or some SaaS providers tooling. You may have some third-party tools that give you visibility across a few different of these costs. And then you may have spreadsheets and other things that are, aggregating some things and maybe forwarding them on to certain business processes very manually. These are all like points of error, right? I'll give you a good example. So when I was in this at the Citigroup role that I had, I was presenting a view or my plan for how we're going to bring in FinOps into Citi and take it broad. And I was presenting to my boss's boss and his directs, right? So the CTO and his directs. And I started with one of the tools that we bought, which is really the premier tool in the space. He stops me. I'm not expecting this guy who manages, $5 billion of IT spend to like get down to these levels of details. But he stops me and he goes, "Are those numbers you're showing in that tool the numbers you charge out at the end of the month?" And I said, "Well, no, these are the direct costs that come from the provider. We take that and we massage it and we do all of these curation of this data. And then we provide the chargeback and all that based on that data." He's like, "Then you need to shut that tool down." Right. And his point is, hey, first of all, Citi, like highly regulated Big Four bank, major like kind of regulations from multiple parts of the government and across the world, right? Governments across the world. So we have to be very precise and accurate. His point is, if an application team looks at that number, forecasts from that, or budgets from that, and then we end up charging some completely different number, someone can be really, really in a tough spot because these numbers aren't really accurate, right? So ended up, we negotiated, we put a banner on this tool to say, these are your direct costs only, come to our tool that provides the full visibility and all that stuff. But it really like made clear to me that like as an industry, we really got to get to that point where we can move comfortably beyond the crawl stage without having to like build everything in-house, right? Citigroup, $12 billion spender of IT, we can afford to go build a team that goes out and builds these things. The vast majority of the organizations can't make those investments into data engineers and data scientists and finance inclined engineers. So I do think if I look a couple of years out, this industry needs more systematic way to do FinOps that doesn't, allow for these mistakes to happen along the way in terms of data accuracy and availability of the data.
I've been at 3 service providers / resellers, and I can tell you hands down, and I think Frank will agree, the most common question I've been asked is, why does this not match this?
Yes. 1,000%.
And I have a billing engine in between. I can tell you it gets mad.
Yeah. And the reality is we're trying to convince people that already aren't that convinced that costs need to be factored on a day-to-day basis, right? And when they see these issues,
it breaks trust, right?
It breaks the trust right away, right? Yeah. So I think, I'm looking forward to that next phase of the FinOps maturity where, we get past some of these things, and all industries, all, things have to go through this kind of growing pains to realize what those, next level problems are, go solve those, and then that enables the next level, right? So
I mean, I've been in a similar position to you. We were using one of the top tools in the market across about 500 million cloud spend across like 200 customers. We had one particular customer, but we didn't use that tool for billing because it couldn't be accurate enough. Yes. And it's not a bad tool, but when you get to that size, there are edge cases and that need multiple steps of change that a tool that is there to serve the masses just can't do. And that's just the reality. But explaining that to customers, oh my goodness, and kind of saying, we will walk, because we did it ourselves, built it ourselves, we can walk you through every step of the calculation. And in this case, it was because it had a load of map credits handed first, and that made RI volume discount a bigger value than a commitment agreement, which I won't name because we're not meant to because of NDAs. And therefore, they happened in a different order because normally discounts happen after credits, but RI volume discounts happen before until, and it's just one of these. And it's like, and you never, as a tooling provider, that is such a niche thing that it doesn't make sense to solve it.
Well, quite often you don't see it because it's not documented in the cloud service provider to start with. They don't have that line that says, oh, by the way, if this condition happens, this, you discover it and you say, why are the numbers not matching? I live like this.
Yeah. But we'll get there. It's a process.
We'll get there.
Every industry goes through this, so we're just in the early days.
Yeah, it's just getting those great people together, which is what Focus has been doing, which has been great. These people have been having these issues. Perfect. Well, I haven't got any more questions. Frank?
No, we're done.
Udam, nice. Are you happy you told the story?
Yeah, I'm very happy. Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks for listening, and goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye, all. See ya.